Hello, and thank you for joining us. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm Emma Ignashevsky, Corporate Engagement Project Manager at the Good Food Institute. Welcome to our webinar on the U.S. retail market for plant-based foods, the accelerated sustainable growth of plant-based foods in 2020, co-hosted with the Plant-Based Foods Association and SPINS. By the end of today's presentation, we hope you'll have a deeper understanding of the multi-billion-dollar market for plant-based foods, a key driver of growth in retail sales. This webinar will provide an overview of newly released sales data and insights for plant-based foods in the US retail market using custom plant-based categories created by GFI and the Plant-Based Foods Association by refining standard SPINS categories. Before we dive in, I'd like to go over a few things for housekeeping. First, we will be sending a copy of the presentation to all registered attendees, and we'll also post the recording on GFI's YouTube channel. We will also send you a direct link to the slide deck we are presenting today. Second, all speakers will be available to answer questions during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. You'll see a Q&A button on your screen, so feel free to submit questions at any time during the webinar, and some questions we will answer directly in the Q&A box as well. Today, after a brief introduction, I'll pass it over to Julie Emmett of the Plant-Based Foods Association for an introduction to PBFA. And then we'll hear from Jeff Crumpton of SPINS, who will walk us through some key insights. We'll then hear from Kyle Gahn of GFI, who will be presenting insights on the overall plant-based market and plant-based meat category, followed by Jennifer Holt of PBFA, who will walk us through key insights for plant-based dairy, eggs, and other plant-based categories. And finally, we'll open it up to some questions. So for those of you not yet familiar with GFI, the Good Food Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit that is developing the roadmap for a sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. We are 100% powered by philanthropy and have earned GuideStar's Platinum Seal of Transparency, an honor obtained by fewer than 1% of nonprofits. GFI has more than 100 team members around the globe. We have three key areas of focus. Our science and technology team works to advance the foundational open access research in alternative proteins, as well as create a thriving research and training ecosystem around these game-changing fields. Our corporate engagement team partners with companies and investors across the globe to drive investment, accelerate innovation, and scale the supply chain all faster than market forces alone would allow. And our policy team advocates for fair policy and public research funding for alternative proteins. The key question we're working to address is how we will feed 10 billion people by 2050 and do so sustainably, efficiently, and safely. Industrial animal agriculture is in the top 2 to 3 most significant contributors to the world's most pressing environmental issues. It uses 75% of agricultural land, yet provides only 33% of the global protein supply. Industrial animal agriculture is also the #1 user of medically important antibiotics. So we believe an answer to these many issues is to make the meat, eggs, and dairy that people love in a more sustainable and efficient way. With alternative proteins, we can make proteins directly from plants with fermentation technology or by using animal cell culture. We'll be focusing on plant-based platforms for today's presentation, but it is worth noting that fermentation is increasingly being used as an enabling technology for the alt protein sector. And also, cultivated meat, which is also sometimes referred to as cell-based or cultured meat, made by growing animal cells outside of the animal, has seen a lot of notable activity in the last year, including the first commercial launch in December in Singapore. So as part of our work to accelerate the alternative protein space, we see it as vital that companies in the space have access to the high-level insights about the size and growth of the plant-based foods market. And by partnering with PBFA and SPINS, we hope this data will help you make the vital business decisions that will help to accelerate investment, innovation, and adoption of alternative proteins. Before I hand things over to PBFA, I would just like to note that much of the data covered here is available on GFI's market data page, which allows visitors to explore sales data for plant-based meat, egg, and dairy products in the US retail market. I also invite you to visit PBFA's analogous page on their site. And with that, I'll turn it over to Julie Emmett to introduce us to PBFA's work.
Thank you, Emma. PBFA is thrilled to be partnering with GFI in this work. And with SPINS as our data partner, we've been able to really significantly broaden and deepen the insights that we created this year. So PBFA is the trade association for the plant-based foods industry in the US. And our mission is to build a solid foundation for the industry to now continue to scale and thrive. Our board members, whose logos you see here, are not only running successful plant-based food companies, but they're also leading initiatives on behalf of the industry. PBFA now has over 300 members and is growing rapidly. And PBFA operates in two key areas, which are policy and consumer access. Within policy, we have advocates at both the state and federal level, and we are not only defending labeling bills to maintain a level playing field, but also proactively seeking policies and legislations to increase access to plant-based foods across all sectors and institutions. We create voluntary labeling standards, and most recently, we're working with farmers by using this data within a sophisticated model to determine acreage needed to support domestic farming for plant-based foods. Within consumer access, our work begins and is grounded in this data and insights in general. We conduct merchandising research. We provide a multitude of educational opportunities like this one, creating a common language and helping to shape retail strategy through our retail partnerships. We provide custom solutions for retailers in the form of events and integrated marketing initiatives. We highlight retailer and brand thought leadership within the media to both educate and inspire. This work is helping to expand space and assortment, which is making it easier for shoppers to find plant-based foods, both online and in retail stores. And who we work with, here's a sample of our industry partners, which spans across many different areas of the industry. And for now, I will point out NSF, who is our third-party certifier for the Certified Plant-Based Certification. And it's this protocol that helps shape the data that we're sharing today. So I'm very excited to turn it over to Jeff Crumpton, SPINS Manager of Retail Reporting Solutions, to kick us off with his expert insights about how 2020 shaped the plant-based foods industry.
Thank you, Julie. Really do appreciate it. For the third year in a row, SPINS is excited to be partnering with both PBFA and GFI on this project. And for more than 25 years, SPINS has been empowering data-driven decisions by thousands of retailers, brands, and other critical industry partners, such as PBFA and GFI, which we are hosts with today, and also our retail, brand, certification, and broker distributor partners throughout the industry. We offer a complete picture of the retail landscape, expanding beyond traditional conventional channels to include retail channels that place incubation and innovation at the very core of their identity. We maintain the most robust understanding of the product attributes that are central to this incubation and innovation. We constantly review and continue to expand this coding based on those areas that are most important to consumers. We leverage both our retail coverage and product intelligence to deliver insights through our best-in-class applications, consultative arm, and thought leadership throughout the industry. SPINS partners with and supports retailers along the entire continuum of the innovation pipeline, which really provides a complete understanding of shopper segmentation, from the most progressive to the more mainstream. This complete visibility into the kinds of shoppers assist brands and other industry partners to have a complete picture of the retail landscape. With over 3 million plus UPCs being tracked and over 300 attributes and growing being applied against those UPCs, the ability to focus on key areas like sustainability, health and wellness, and seeker and avoider shopper preferences are unlocked using these attributes. If we take this attribute understanding to the next level, there is no part of how products are presented to consumers that can't be uncovered and leveraged. Here you see elements as simple as product size and description, but also label and certification claims that are made on the packaging. Information gleaned from the nutrition fact panel and the ingredient label form the backbone of an array of attributes that align to shoppers' desire to seek out either positive ingredient trends like low sugar or avoidance of others like high fat or the inclusion of grains such as gluten. Understanding the multiple ways that attribute coding layers on top of each other allows you to understand which segment plant-based shoppers are searching for. For brands, this allows you to respond to consumers' need states for future product development. And for retailers, this will ensure that your product mix reflects what shoppers expect when in store. Now that I've introduced you to SPINS, our partners, and the depth of our item coding, let's jump into the strength of the plant-based market in 2020 and see how continued innovation will sustain the future growth of this segment. As we dive into the data today, it's important to recognize that we have several ways to think about plant-based coding. First, the plant-based diet on the left is rooted in the concept of eliminating all animal-derived ingredient from one's diet and is specifically designed to help shoppers adhere to a more rigorous form of plant-based eating. The plant-based positioned attribute on the right focuses on the alternative or substitute concept. Note that these products may still contain certain ingredients that are animal-derived, such as egg white and meat-free nuggets, or dairy, cheese, and a veggie burger. But these product examples are still positioned as plant-based alternatives to meat, are found in plant-based subcategories, and are an important element when considering the entire spectrum of the various forms of plant-based eating. As I mentioned earlier, we do constantly review new products and expand our coding to be more inclusive of product innovation into new categories as the market continues to grow. You can see that we currently have 4 dedicated categories, which then break into 41 subcategories that are exclusively plant-based focused. Beyond that, we code in 20 categories, which break into 54 subcategories that would consist of plant-based and animal-based products. With the release of our P5 data at the end of May, we will expand this plant-based coding into 9 more categories, which will include 14 subcategory breakouts. This just reinforces the fact that the plant-based market is strong and that innovation continues to be brisk. If we take a more comprehensive look at all products positioned as clear alternatives to traditional meat and dairy products, we can understand how other sustainability elements impact purchase behavior and where market opportunities may exist to cater towards sustainability need states. It's important to understand that plant-based products do not exist within a vacuum, and there are a complementary component or attributes in our parlance that share the same goal. So if we start off by placing plant-based positioned products at the core of our analysis, we can start to review other complementary attributes that nest under this broader umbrella. So for example, 25% of plant-based products are also organic, but closer to 80% are labeled non-GMO, with strong double-digit growth year over year for both. Certification claims such as B Corp and Fair Trade mean that those consumers searching for plant-based products also expect those products to have aspects of sustainability. Within the plant-based spectrum, vegan has become the most dominant product trait, backed by a more comprehensive shopper need state than vegetarian products that don't meet the same vegan qualifications. Overrepresented by high carb, low protein varieties in the past, plant-based proteins are showing a major market swing towards low carb, high protein to better align with shopper expectations of what meat alternatives should represent nutritionally. Diets such as Whole30 and Paleo that focus on fewer additives, minimal processing, clean ingredient profiles, as well as ancestral or whole food components, are underrepresented yet show early promise. Currently, these two diets have very little market share when looking at, for example, a plant-based category across the store. Whole30 and paleo diets exclude most grains and legumes, including soy, which are traditionally prevalent in these categories. However, these diets, with their solid year-over-year growth rates, represent large opportunities for brands to innovate and expand their reach to plant-based consumers. I also spoke earlier about the idea that traditional plant-based products lean heavily on ingredients that include soy or wheat as main ingredients. Here we're using those ingredient attributes to isolate products that exclude soy or wheat, for example. Protein from plant-based sources represent a promising alternative for shoppers that identify with a food-based allergen. So even tofu, tempeh, seitan are seeing innovation that keeps pace with other plant-based categories. The combination of soy-free and wheat-free products are growing even faster than the overall plant-based market, illustrating all the potential paths to incorporate plant-based ingredients into products across the store. As plant-based categories continue to grow and evolve, brands are differentiating by elevating nutritional content of their products in order to achieve parity with traditional meat and dairy. Indeed, nutritional parity with meat and dairy is vital to the battle for the flexitarian shopper. Protein has surfaced as the #1 priority, but carbs, added sugars, vitamin, minerals continue to play an elevated role in this space. Shoppers looking to avoid high sugar content in favor of low calorie sweeteners, so that when we think about plant-based dairy brands, we're seeing them use alternative sweeteners or natural whole food ingredients to bring down their sugar content. We see this in a range of beverage categories, as well as frozen desserts and yogurt and kefir products. It's not surprising that plant-based milks, which represent the largest volume, see increased number of products with no added caloric sweeteners. But we also see this proliferation into other beverage categories, like the refrigerated, ready-to-drink tea and coffee, and the juice and functional beverages, which have really quite impressive growth rates. These changes in product formulations mean that plant-based brands can take advantage of naturally focused, low-calorie sweeteners that appeal to multiple need states. These products are doing double duty to meet consumers' high expectations for the products that they consume. So now that we've visited many of the underlying trends that are part of the broader plant-based umbrella, let's now turn our attention to how those products performed during the past year. Let's start with the current period ending March the 21st, 2021, on the far right of the chart. The most noticeable aspect here is that the year-over-year growth rate has taken a sudden turn down into negative territory. And while this may be at first startling to see, let's remember that we just now are starting to cycle the crazy high rates that correspond with the start of the panic buying that we witnessed just a year ago. If you see to the far left that plant-based products for food and bev spiked to almost 60% versus 2019 numbers. So kind of given this context, we can expect that that decline is pretty normal. In fact, what we see here is that plant-based products enter 2020 higher than their animal-based equivalents, and has continued to remain higher throughout the last year. I personally can vividly remember the last downturn in the economy during the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. And while the root causes of these crises were different, consumer behavior was generally the same as now. Shoppers prioritized their spending to include better-for-you products, with increases in organic and specialty spending versus more conventionally focused products. Given the stress and the uncertainty about wellness and immunity over the last year, it's no surprise that shoppers prioritize plant-based products and will continue to do so into 2021. And with that, let me turn it over to Kyle.
Great, thank you so much, Jeff. To set the stage, We'll be sharing SPIN's retail sales data for the total marketplace. This is an aggregate of 2 channels, MULO, which includes conventional grocers like Kroger and mass retailers like Walmart, and then the natural enhanced channel, which includes retailers such as Sprouts. The majority of the data is for the 52 weeks ending December 27th, 2020. But in some cases, we take a 2-year view, looking back over 104 weeks. The plant-based products included in this data are only those that are direct substitutes for animal products or products containing a main animal ingredient. Inherently plant-based foods, such as chickpeas or kale, are not included in this data. If you were to include those products, the volume would be significantly higher. We built this custom database by pulling in all products with the SPIN's plant-based position and plant-based diet attributes, and then refined the data set by removing any products that were not a direct replacement for animal products. It's important to note that this lens is somewhat custom. For those who purchase SPIN's data, it may not map exactly to your reports. As you can see here on this slide, there are 9 high-level categories included: tofu and tempeh, and then plant-based meat, milk, eggs, meals, condiments and dressings, baked goods, protein powders, and then other plant-based dairy categories as well. Later in the presentation, we will look at some of these individual categories in more detail. As discussed on the prior slide, our data is composed of 2 channels, natural enhanced and MULO. Just to quickly go over those, MULO includes more than 104,000 retail locations spanning grocery, drug, mass, dollar, military, and club. And then the natural enhanced channel is more than 1,800 full format stores with $2 million plus in annual sales, 40% or more of the UPC coded sales from the natural, organic, or specialty products. All right, let's take a closer look at the data now. To start, let's take a look at the total plant-based food growth in the US retail. US retail sales of plant-based foods grew 27% over the course of 2020 to hit $7 billion. This is up from just under $5 billion in 2018. Looking at individual categories, we can see that plant-based milk is the largest plant-based food category at $2.5 billion. The next largest category is the aggregation of all the other plant-based dairy categories like plant-based ice cream, yogurt, and cheese. These categories reached a combined total of $1.9 billion in 2020 and grew at 28%. Plant-based meat is the 3rd largest category, and it grew at an impressive 45% over the course of the year and crossed the $1 billion mark to reach $1.4 billion in sales. Then one more category I want to highlight on this slide is plant-based eggs. The youngest and smallest category, $27 million. Plant-based eggs grew at a massive 168%. Growth is strong in all census regions, and the West and the South are the largest regions by dollar sales at $2.2 billion and $2.3 billion, respectively. While most would expect the West to be driving plant-based food growth, the South's slightly larger market size is an interesting takeaway. The strong demand in the South is likely being driven by urban areas, particularly large cities like Austin, Atlanta, DC, and Charlotte. We see the same dynamic for the organic, non-GMO, and clean label categories, in which the South is a close second to the West due to these highly populated, food-forward urban cities. One more data point to note is that people of color over-index for plant-based purchasing, both in terms of buyer and dollar spend. So cities like Atlanta or cities in Texas with high percentages of people of color be driving the dollar spend upwards in this region. Plant-based food has performed well in the retail channel, with retailers stocking hundreds of plant-based SKUs. Leading retailers have more than 100 plant-based meat products across the store. More than 80% of retailers offer at least 10 different refrigerated plant-based meat SKUs. This is important as selling plant-based meat products in refrigerated sections adjacent to their animal-based meat counterparts. It's been shown to increase sales of plant-based meat products. This dynamic was first seen when plant-based milk sales skyrocketed after being merchandised in the milk aisle. And I'll cover this in more detail on later slides. Plant-based products are appearing throughout the store, including prepared foods and retail food service. 70% of top US retailers are offering plant-based proteins in some kind of prepared food. You can see some examples of these prepared foods from Heinen's, Kroger, and Stop and Shop on this slide. And finally, one last thing to note is that plant-based private label offerings are also expanding. This slide displays various retailers and their plant-based private label coverage. Retailers like Kroger and Albertsons offer plant-based private label products across the meat, milk, dairy, and meal categories. All right, now we'll shift back into looking at that SPINS data. This slide is really illustrative. Here we compare the dollar sales growth of plant-based products to those of animal-based products across key categories over a 2-year time period. We chose 2 years in this case to sort of smooth out that spike in growth that we saw with COVID in 2020. The plant-based products are represented by the dark turquoise bars and the animal-based products by the yellow bars. Across categories, plant-based product sales growth significantly outpacing that of animal-based products, with most plant-based products experiencing high double-digit sales growth over the past 2 years. Taking a look at dollar share, you can see that the share of market that plant-based foods have in each product category in this slide. As expected of the most developed plant-based category, plant-based milk has the largest share of market of its category at 15% of all milk dollar sales. It's worth noting that this is beyond the commonly cited 10% tipping point for trend adoption. Plant-based protein powders, plant-based butter, and plant-based creamer have the next greatest shares of market, although less than milks, range between 6 and 7% dollar share. Plant-based meat and cheese still only have a little more than 1% share of their respective categories. And then plant-based egg, the least developed category, is still just a fraction of 1%. So across the board, we can see tons of opportunity for share growth if these other categories can successfully follow the trajectory set by plant-based milk. So who's driving this increased purchasing? Plant-based buyers tend to be younger, from higher income brackets, and have college or graduate degrees. They're also more likely to have children and to be people of color. While all people of color over-index for plant-based purchasing, Asian consumers in particular have had high interaction. These demographic trends hold in terms of dollar indexes as well, with consumers aged 35 to 44, consumers with graduate degrees, consumers with income greater than 100,000, all having high levels of interaction. All right, now that we've covered the total market, let's take a closer look at the plant-based meat category itself. 2020 was another strong year for plant-based meat, with the category growing at 45% over the past year to reach $1.4 billion in sales. This is an increase of more than $580 million over the past 2 years. Plant-based meat, particularly the plant-based burger, has generated considerable interest, consumers, investors, and the press, in large part due to record-setting fundraising rounds by plant-based meat companies like Impossible Foods, as well as numerous retail and food service product launches from both new and established food companies. Plant-based meat category growth is being driven by refrigerated plant-based meat sales. And refrigerated plant-based meat is taking an increasingly larger share of the category over the past 2 years. And this reflects shifts in both product innovation as well as those merchandising strategies I mentioned earlier, in which refrigerated plant-based meat is being increasingly shelved in the meat case rather than in the specialty vegan section. So to look into that in more detail, an integrated segregated strategy increases access for the majority of consumers. Plant-based options are easily found in go-to areas, and then plant-based and animal-based products are easily compared, so consumers can better appreciate premium products and trade up. Importantly, 76% of consumers say they prefer to shop for plant-based meat in the meat or frozen section, compared to only 24% who prefer finding those products in the produce section. And so then for categories with less developed portfolios like creamer or eggs, a fully integrated strategy may be a good option. In the US, we've seen substantial increases in plant-based meat sales after switching to the integrated segregated merchandising strategy. GFI worked with Heinen's to make the switch across the meat, dairy, frozen, and deli categories, which resulted in a 43% year-on-year increase in dollar sales, outpacing typical plant-based growth. And then the Plant-Based Foods Association partnered with Kroger to run a controlled study that found a 23% increase in plant-based meat sales once plant-based meat was merchandised in the meat section. And this is compared to a segregated merchandising strategy. And finally, in this slide, we can just see some merchandising examples from Sainsbury's, which integrated plant-based meals alongside conventional meals and used signage to call out key private label products. All right, on these next few slides, we'll compare analog and non-analog plant-based meat products. This slide explains our definition of analog and non-analog. While some brands tend to focus on just analog or just non-analog type products, brands with a large breadth of products have both. So we've included some examples of products on this slide. On the left, we have products like Beyond and Impossible that closely mimic animal-based meat products. On the right, there are products from Dr. Prager's and Hillary's that are more plant-forward. We can see that some brands like Morningstar have a mix of both analog and non-analog type products. So analog products that closely match the taste, texture, and appearance of animal-based meat make up the majority of plant-based meat category and drive the category growth. This aligns with consumer data on the types of consumers that are purchasing plant-based meat. Despite misconceptions, it's not a group of vegetarians and vegans. In fact, 98% of plant-based meat buyers also purchase animal-based meat. This is supported across a variety of studies. One found that 95% of people who order the Impossible Burger regularly consume animal products. While another study found that 93% of consumers in conventional grocery stores that are buying Beyond Meat are also putting animal meat in their basket. And then a third study found that 9 out of 10 people who purchased plant-based meat or dairy also bought animal-based meat and dairy. So in other words, these consumers are looking for products that are familiar to them and closely match the taste, texture, and experience of eating animal-based products. By comparison, non-analog products like black bean burgers and veggie burgers only make up a small percentage of the overall plant-based meat category and have lower dollar sales growth. It is important to note that there's still room in the market for non-analog products, particularly for vegans and vegetarians, people who follow a more plant-forward diet. All right, taking a look at product forms. The top selling forms of plant-based meat are burgers, followed by sausages, links, and patties, and then nuggets, tenders, and cutlets. And the fastest growing format was plant-based grounds, which more than doubled its size over the course of 2020. And then that refrigerated frozen dynamic we mentioned earlier also holds among the plant-based meat product formats, with refrigerated product formats tending to grow faster than their frozen counterparts. While plant-based burgers established the plant-based meat category, there is considerable room for innovation outside of the burger subcategory. Companies are now beginning to focus on other product types like breakfast patties, meatballs, and crab cakes. There are many other plant-based meat product types that have yet to be innovated on in a significant way. For example, whole muscle products such as steaks and chicken breasts are considered to be the holy grail of plant-based meat product development. Certain products are marketed as being analogous to a specific type of animal. So sometimes the distinction is clear, the type of product they're matching, such as cases of plant-based chorizo, chicken with the apostrophe N, or products like fishless fillets. In other cases, the packaging may suggest use cases, for example, use like ground beef. And so plant-based beef is the highest selling subcategory of plant-based meat when we look at it by animal type, followed by plant-based pork and then plant-based chicken. And plant-based seafood remains a market white space at the moment. When it all comes down to it, we all know that the shelf merchandising marketing. At this point, there are thousands of unique plant-based meat, egg, and dairy SKUs. Consumers are looking for more diversity in product types with alternative proteins. So like we mentioned before, bacon, fish, whole cuts, bone-in and structured chicken. These are all underrepresented at the moment. Consumers are looking for format versatility, different flavor profiles and eating sizes to complement a variety of eating styles. And there are a couple of clear opportunities in terms of engaging the butcher, deli, and prepared food sections. In the US, for example, although plant-based meat accounts for just under 3% of dollar sales for retail packaged meat, random weight plant-based meat is still an enormous white space. So we've mentioned this before, that whole muscle cuts are a key development area. And I'll note that GFI's current research grant program is helping to raise foundational knowledge when it comes to producing alternatives to whole cuts of meat that are often found in the butcher section. So where are the biggest opportunity areas for plant-based food? In our view, taste and price are the key areas of focus right now. This left-hand side shows how consumers are looking for improved taste in plant-based products, while the right-hand side shows prices for popular plant-based products versus their animal-based counterparts. We can see that in terms of pricing, plant-based products still have a way to go in terms of reaching price parity with animal-based products. So this should be a key focus for plant-based food companies in order to increase consumer adoption. With that, I'll close out my section and I'll hand it over to Jennifer from the Plant-Based Foods Association. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyle. So turning our attention now to plant-based dairy and eggs, we'll first take a look at the largest and most mature plant-based category, as Kyle mentioned, plant-based milk. With nearly half of all households purchasing this category, plant-based milk sales are now worth $2.5 billion in US sales, with 20% past year growth, surpassing its conventional animal counterpart by more than double. Plant-based milk now encompasses 15% market share of the total milk category. And although exclusive use of plant milk remains low, since the majority of households purchase a variety and combination of animal and plant-based alternatives for different uses in household members, households with kids remain a target demographic opportunity. Taste and nutritional profile also remain a plant-based priority as consumers seek comparable nutrients found in animal milk. Organic, protein content, low sugar, and cholesterol all remain important, as does a variety of flavors. Refrigerated milk was integrated into the overall conventional milk shelf set over a decade ago, allowing for more shopper penetration and growth. And although refrigerated milk still makes up the majority of plant-based category sales, shelf-stable milk also saw notable growth as consumers stocked up during COVID. This, in addition, was as well to having more varieties and flavors on the shelf. Traditionally, plant-based milk is a low-risk entry point for consumers that started with soy milk decades ago. And although almond milk now has the highest dollar volume purchase within the plant-based subcategories, oat milk has shown the highest growth rate and also moved ahead of soy dollars. So although almond, soy, and oat milk top the three varieties of plant-based milk sales, oat milk has experienced massive growth over the prior 2 years, growing from a tiny segment of the market in 2018 to the second largest plant-based milk product type in 2020. In addition to oat milk sales, oats are emerging as the next big plant-based dairy alternative ingredient. Crucial for oat milk's long-term viability, it also has ecological credibility compared to almonds, because almonds require over 6 times as much water to grow as oats do. Oat milk is truly a superstar, and increased interest in oat milk has carried over into other plant-based dairy categories, with numerous product launches in plant-based yogurts, ready-to-drink beverages, and creamers that use oat milk as a base. Turning our attention to the remaining plant-based dairy categories, ice cream, frozen novelties have the highest dollar volume at $435 million with 20% growth. While dips and spreads has the lowest dollar volume at $61 billion, it has the highest growth at 83%. In addition to strong overall sales, all plant-based dairy categories show growth well above their conventional counterparts. As consumers are now shopping multiple plant-based dairy categories, plant-based cheese is emerging and offering opportunity with past year growth of 42%. Price and value will be important variables as competition increases in this category and consumers are more price sensitive due to COVID. Looking more specifically at ice cream, U.S. retail sales of plant-based ice cream and frozen novelty products are worth $435 million US. Plant-based ice cream has seen double the growth from 2018 to 2019 at 10% to an increase of 20% past year. Again, more than double past year growth of the conventional category. During the height of the crisis, there was a return to indulgent comfort food rather than better for you options. and traditional dairy products, including indulgent desserts and ice creams. With this, we saw a resurgence in popularity based on familiarity, comfort, and affordability. Moving forward, there will be a shift back to healthier yet tasty foods to get health back on track. Plant-based dairy alternatives, especially cheese substitutes and plant-based ice creams, are well positioned to offer consumers a better-for-you indulgence as they transition back to a more balanced diet. Shifting from ice cream to creamer, U.S. retail sales of plant-based creamer are now worth $394 million, with a 32% past year growth. Following the trends of many plant-based growth rates, creamer also saw more than double the growth of conventional creamer. With more brands and forms available, including liquids and powders, creamer market share has also increased from 5% in 2019 to 6% in 2020. As more options continue to enter the market, nutritional profile and ingredients will remain a priority, as well as texture, taste, and functionality. Turning our attention to yogurt, representing $343 million in U.S. sales, plant-based yogurt grew more than 6 times faster at 20% compared to conventional yogurt at 3% in 2020. As consumers look for functionality and indulgence in yogurt, brands have the opportunity to respond to consumer demand with indulgent plant-based dairy with treat-like style flavors. An opportunity also exists to tap into the growing popularity of oat, coconut, and pea protein, as well as rich and creamy ingredients like avocado as consumers edge away from the more established ingredients such as almond and soy. In addition to indulgence, as functional benefits and claims continue to rise, consumers look to yogurt for digestive and gut health, including ingredients such as pro and prebiotics. Turning our attention to butter, although currently a smaller plant-based category, as scratch cooking, meals at home, and baking surged during the pandemic, butter sales soared, nearly double the conventional growth at $275 million and 36% growth. Plant-based dollar share of butter also rose 7%, up from 6% in 2019. Consumers will continue to look for performance while baking and opportunities exist for varieties in forms as well as ingredient profiles. Last but not least, in the plant-based dairy subcategories, cheese saw notable dollar volume, $270 billion, and more than double the growth at 42% compared to conventional cheese. Although cashews are the leading ingredient in plant-based cheese, sunflower seed oil is the most common used in vegan cheeses, followed by coconut oil. Hemp seeds and pumpkin seeds are also emerging as ingredient options. Sunflower can give cashew and coconut competition in the vegan plant-based cheese category. While still a niche, seeds represent opportunity in plant-based cheese due to the high fat content of these ingredients, making them attractive for plant-based dairy, including cheese, as well as boasting nutritional benefits. For example, avocado seeds contain 3 times more antioxidants than green tea. As price represents a barrier to plant-based cheese, consumers will continue to look for value. Private label plant-based cheeses are expected to grow in popularity along with lower priced ingredients with plant-based cheese made from potatoes, legumes, and seeds. And last but not least, although a newer and lower volume plant-based category at 27 million, plant-based eggs saw tremendous past year growth at 168%, nearly 10 times the growth of conventional eggs. Plant-based eggs offer environmental benefits, allergen safety, animal welfare, and food safety. In addition, they're also shelf stable, so they offer convenience. For continued growth, plant-based eggs will need to focus on taste, texture, and functionality across eating occasions, as well as the functionality and performance during baking. And with that, I would like to hand things back to Emma, who will be moderating the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you to all of our presenters. That concludes the presentation portion of the webinar, and we'll move on to our Q&A session. I also will say again that we will be sending all registrants a direct link to today's slides. A recording of this webinar will be available on GFI's YouTube channel. And I also welcome you to sign up for GFI's Plant-Based Insider newsletter to receive monthly updates on the alt protein industry and new resources. And at this point, we'd love to take a few questions. So please continue to add any that you have to the Q&A box. And I'll extend this first question to Jennifer, and then maybe Kyle, if you want to jump in too. So there was a good question here about where this growth in plant-based is coming from. Is it coming from first-time trial, increased distribution, more volume per buyer? Jennifer, did you want to address that?
So NUTRIONAL, sure, actually, Emma, yes, that would be great. So NUTRIONAL is one of the places where the plant-based growth is coming from, but the other two big ones that are notable is consumers used to purchase one, maybe two categories, and now they're purchasing multiple categories across the store. So previously, maybe only purchasing milk, they're now, expanding their palette to try other plant-based products. In addition, they're buying more of those, and they're also heavy repeat numbers. So repeat is continuing to increase from plant-based year over year.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jennifer. And Kyle, did you want to add anything about the consumer motivations and barriers with switching from animal products to plant-based products?
Yeah, I think by and large, we see in consumer surveys, consumers highlight health being a key driver of why they're interested in plant-based foods. But when we see look at other consumer surveys, when consumers are actually making those decisions, they often highlight taste and price as being sort of the deciding factor when they're actually in the grocery store looking at the products. So that's just to sort of go back to the same points that I made earlier in the webinar, which is for the average consumer, the omnivore, when making that decision on what plant-based product to grab, or making that choice between a plant-based product or an animal-based product, getting plant-based products that are at price parity and that replicate that same experience of eating animal-based products is super important here for consumer decision making. So yeah, I'll just add that on.
Thanks, Kyle. And then this next question, I was wondering if you could weigh in on as well. So in terms of plant-based protein source type, what are some of the upcoming and trending sources? Some examples given were water, lentils, chickpea, fava bean, algae, etc. What about combinations? I think we did have some data at some point about the number of top products that do use combinations. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. So, there's many of the top brands currently. Their products are a mix of soy and wheat, actually. So it's generally, in some cases, it's just soy or just wheat, but in many cases, there's a combination. And we expect to see combination of plant proteins, even as we see increasing diversification in the types of plant proteins we're using. The reality is that it's going to be a combination of proteins that bring in different functional characteristics from one or the other and create a better product overall by using these hybrid plant protein sources. So, as we see increasing development in proteins like chickpeas or duckweed, my guess is that it's not going to be the case that a product is just one base or the other. It's going to be a combination of proteins.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. And I'll also add that GFI does have a plant protein primer that sort of compares dozens of major plant protein sources on a variety of parameters. I'd encourage you to download that. If you go to our website, gfi.org, you'll find it by searching for plant protein primer. And I think sustainability is a great area where further research can still be done. Next question here. Julie, for you. So with plant-based meats, what categories do we see as being the next game changers on the horizons? I know Kyle mentioned a little bit about whole muscle cuts and plant-based seafood. What other proof points do you see that those might be big categories, or other categories you think will be playing big in the plant-based space? And then also, if you foresee any challenges to the commercialization of those products.
Thank you. Yes. So seafood is definitely a tremendous opportunity. So we know that it's about 12 million, growing significantly. And while we know Seaspiracy brought a lot of exposure to the category, it's been a long time trend that just helped prop and bring additional awareness. And in terms of, I want to mention that in being able to truly understand that category and how it's developing, I just want to nod to Spin's categorization and product type. Breaks seafood down extremely well to understand if it's a tuna or a fillet or a scallop or a shrimp. I mean, we know shrimp is a tremendous opportunity, what shoppers are really looking for to make a difference in that entire, it's really, we're anticipating that that's going to explode, that there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity. And one of the challenges that we're hearing is that how will that be merchandised? Oftentimes it's frozen. Can it be merchandised and chilled? And that's something that we have a big focus in our education efforts and partnerships with retailers, is to help figure that out together, to make sure that the research is done and shoppers are taken into consideration, and what's the best way to introduce that into the market in a way that's visible and accessible and that shoppers understand. And the other categories that we're seeing that are small but are significant, when you look at spreads, dips, more so sauces and eggs and butter, the types of foods that are used in baking and cooking are growing significantly. And based on this last year, all the things that we learned about needing, we all know everybody cooked more at home, but just needing that comfort and familiarity, and now to be able to swap out animal products in a way that's much easier, much more flavorful. We're really looking to those categories to be much more substantial in volume as they continue to grow triple digits.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie. Great insights. This next question I'll give to Jeff. So do you have any thoughts on price parity, when that might be achieved, or what barriers companies will have to overcome, and sort of the trajectory for the market approaching that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We looked at kind of the bigger categories like plant-based milk, plant-based meats. And what we saw is that with plant-based milks, kind of the fact that they've been around for so long across all retail types, that pricing was really at parity. And in some cases, like regional and independent grocers that we work with, those prices are actually cheaper than what we see for more mainstream analog products. The one thing that kind of bucked the trend on that is when we looked at plant-based meats, we saw that, for example, in the natural channel and conventional channel, that kind of multi-outlet, that there was some pricing parity. So brands have done a really good job kind of holding pricing down to be able to compete with more traditional meat products. But when we looked at something like those regional and independent grocers, again, we actually saw that their prices were higher and that they actually benefited for having those higher prices. I mean, the one thing that we've looked at over the last year is these kind of the division of kind of different types of retailers. And we've seen that these regional independents have really been head and shoulders above other retailers, growing even faster. So everyone has done well, but they've done particularly well. Kind of once we get out of the kind of the main milk and meat categories, there is this sort of halo of premium pricing when you get into something like snacks, or you get into some of the other categories, if they're protein supplements or other kind of dairy, yogurt, ice cream, things like that. There is this sort of halo of higher price. And I think that they, quite frankly, can benefit, those categories can benefit with what we've seen with plant-based milks and specifically plant-based meats over the last year.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff. Kyle, this one is for you. So there was a question about, labeling and marketing products, and discussion around the fact that restaurants or retailers might not be labeling these products as vegan or vegetarian. Could you talk a little bit about the motivations for marketing products as vegan, vegetarian versus plant-based? And also maybe talk about how taste comes into play with that.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually typing an answer to that as you as you said that. So I'll just answer it live instead. So actually, research shows that terms like plant-based are preferred by consumers over terms like vegan and vegetarian. Plant-based is less restrictive and it's more acceptable to the average consumer. It speaks to what the product offers rather than what the product takes away. And so, without question, we always encourage brands to use plant-based language rather than vegan or vegetarian or meat-free language. So in the case of food service operators, we think it's important to highlight what the product offers. And so in this case, we would encourage them to use plant-based terminology rather than vegan or vegetarian.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kyle. I also wanted to open it up to any of the panelists. We have a couple of questions on hybrid products or combinations of animal and plant-based proteins, how they've been doing on the market as compared to pure plant-based meat. And then also discussion of products that are hybrids of plant protein and then also cultivated proteins. Do any of the panelists have ideas on how those might tap into specific consumer niches or the potential there for products to sort of fulfill new sensory needs of consumers?
Yeah, I can speak to that second question on the hybrid products. So there's three main alternative protein categories that we see at GFI. The first is plant-based, which we've been talking about today. The second is fermentation, which is mushrooms or the use of yeast to create proteins. So an example of that would be corn. And we actually include corn in this plant-based data just because there aren't necessarily enough standalone fermentation derived products right now. And then the final category is cultivated proteins. So you're taking animal fat and muscle cells and growing those in a bioreactor. And so these are three distinct protein categories, but we actually view them more as a spectrum in the sense that we're going to increasingly see products that use ingredients from each of the three protein categories to create better tasting alternative protein products. And so we actually already see that happening today. So the Impossible Burger, for example, is a plant-based burger, but its key ingredient, heme, which gives its meaty flavor, is produced through fermentation. So that's an example of an existing product that uses proteins from multiple protein categories. And then another example is Mission Barns released a cultivated bacon product, which was a mix of cultivated fat cells and then plant proteins that provided texture. So already we have examples of products that through combining proteins from different protein categories are able to create better tasting products for consumers. So we certainly expect to see more and more hybrid products in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. I look forward to the day when we have sales data on those products as well, and just more products across these three very unique platforms. So with that, we are out of time for questions today. Thank you again to all of our panelists. Please feel free to reach out to us at corporate@gfi.org with any questions that we didn't get to in our limited time. And to learn more, please feel free to contact us and check out our wealth of resources on our respective websites, gfi.org, pbfa.org, and spins.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.